Welcome to the Strategic Treasurer Podcast, your source for interesting Treasury news in your car, at the gym, or wherever you decide to tune in.
The role of the corporate treasurer is increasing in importance today. On this episode of the podcast, Strategic Treasurer's managing partner Craig Jeffery and Ion Treasury's global head of corporate development Alex Triplett share valuable insights on empowering the Treasury community through operational best practices, machine learning techniques, and using data science to inform optimal decision-making. They also discuss the benefits of the convergence of capital markets and the corporate community. Listen in as they explore how the Treasury community is being empowered through innovative uses of technology.
This is Craig Jeffery with Strategic Treasurer. Welcome to the Treasury Update Podcast. Today's topic is empowering the Treasury community. I'm here with Alex Triplett from Ion. Alex, welcome.
Thank you, Craig. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so we're recording this at the AFP annual conference in Chicago, and we walked back, and it was definitely the Windy City.
I'll second that.
We're glad
its fall is in the air.
We're glad it was a short walk. So as we move to this topic of empowering the Treasury community, I wanted to start off by asking what you're seeing in terms of changes or in terms of continued core functionality about the role of the corporate treasurer. What's increasing in importance, and that'll reflect on the rest of our discussion.
Yeah, certainly, Craig. So we have a pretty foundational view of how the role of the corporate treasurer is shifting. And it's really a collection of what we're hearing back from all of our customers, as well as what we experience on our own as a growing corporation that makes acquisitions and has lots of entities in lots of countries. And we're seeing a couple of things in particular. So number one, the role of the treasurer is increasing in importance. And it's increasing in importance because cash is everything. The use of that cash, whether for corporate reinvestment, whether to do something strategic, whether to repay debt, is ever increasing. And so what we're finding is that as treasurers are embracing all of these various facets that can be harnessed through technology, they're making more proactive decisions around the management of cash. So can I proactively get better spreads in FX? Can I proactively be more creative in capital structure? Can I get better and more real-time cash positioning? Can I really drive the envelope in the use of tools to help manage my balance sheet better? And I think we're seeing a more proactive treasurer enabled by digitization. So that's what we're really seeing.
Yeah. So is that primarily an efficiency play? You're yanking things out of the process, making it more streamlined, or is it more strategic element? They're able to focus on more value-added type activities, or what does the organization need to do, and use Treasury to support it. How are you seeing that in terms of a mix?
Yeah, it is both. On the one hand, on the operational side, automation and digitization forces people to go through and audit processes and say, well, if I'd like to get maximum efficiency and harness all the insights that the machine can bring me, the tool, the treasury management system can bring me, I need to wring automation out of the system and enable my treasury staff and my team to become really data scientists, right, and add value that way. So that's a foundational. But the other thing that we're seeing is really using, and you don't need automation necessarily to do this, but it is an enabler, using the data to make better decisions. So the two in combination are quite powerful, but the better decisions would be, where do I want to invest my money? Which banks do I want to interact with? What's the right balance sheet structure? And how do I answer those questions? What are my peers doing? So I've got my view of the world. What do my peers do? What do other people do? Have I seen various trends that lead me to believe that I should take on more leverage, or I should have more or less bank partners? I should have more or less bank accounts for particular currencies in particular regions. And how do I make that decision? I just need to get a benchmark. I need to get some data. So you can run that data insight process separate to the automation. If you put them together, it's pretty powerful.
Yeah, so let's move on to this, the role of the treasurer being more important, has to be more strategic. I know we say that, you hear that 500 times at a conference. Everybody talks about being more strategic, and you just describe some ways that it is more. What is the right structure to address things? Who are the right counterparties that give us the right services, advice, better deals that we can reference, use that to expand what we're doing. But why don't you talk about community? You talk a lot about community, and sometimes that's, people think about that in terms of the community outside your group, negotiating it with and talking with different peers and other companies to gain insight from the market or benchmarks. But you also talk about it internally in the organization, different elements of treasury and finance. Why don't you explain what you mean by it and what's the value of community?
Yeah. So community to us is really a network or a group that has a commonality around an area. So for instance, we're in the Treasury world. And so what a community means is, speaking from ION, we've got over 1,200 corporates across 7 products. We have a unique community. We have lots of corporations from lots of different industry classifications, lots of different regions, lots of different pressures on their businesses, but ultimately they're bound by the same thing. They're treasurers, they need to manage cash, they need to make the right decisions, and they want to learn from each other. So that's a community with a common purpose, although the broader businesses might be different. And we look at things like that, and we try to assess how we can add value through community. I think Strategic Treasurer is a great example of that. You have a voice of community, right? So you're interacting with treasurers every single day. You can provide a voice to what they're feeling, what they're thinking, and so others can learn from that. So we look at community as you've got a group that's got a consistent theme or bond, in this case Treasury, and no matter where they're coming from, big, small, regional, multinational, whatever, they all have a very similar goal in mind. They may be in different stages, different sizes of that goal. So that's what we mean by community.
If you talk about Treasury to, let's say, your friends, almost nobody understands Treasury. It's, you talk to them and they say, oh, you manage money, or they don't get it. We talk to treasurers is about the best you can come up with. But when you get into the Treasury community, people that live Treasury, you can talk some of the same language, but there's a huge difference. And you talk about a number of different products. You may have someone who's using OpenLink who has a tremendous level of commodity exposure. That's a very different organization. And Treasury acts very different there than someone who's, I just need to see my cash position, move funds, do some accounting entries, that may be using Treasurer at a very different end of the spectrum. Yeah, they need to see things, but their set of needs, there's an overlap, but there's a huge sections of the circles that don't overlap. How do you think about community in those regards, where there's commonality and then some pretty big differences?
Yeah, so interesting you bring those examples up, and I would actually challenge that they don't necessarily overlap. So, one of the values of a community is if you all look and feel the same, so for instance, you all use the same product or you're all in the same region, the amount of insight that you get can be limited. So one of the greatest facets of community is, number one, it's an organic way to challenge yourself. If you simply took a draconian view and challenged every assumption internally as an internal person, you're not really going to gain as much insight. If you go into a community that's got uniqueness and diversity and you say, look, there's a lot of different outliers, a lot of different parameters, maybe let's test ourselves. Let's stretch our imagination. Let's find something new. It might actually not be the comparable peer. It might be the company that's 2 or 3 or 4 orders of magnitude different than us that we really learn from, right? So that's number one. I think number two is, when you have a set of unique community participants, you get a lot of pattern recognition, and pattern recognition through different stages. So I'm a mid-sized company now. I have $1 billion in cash. I'm growing. When I get to 10, what's going to happen? And so I need insights, not who I am today, who I want to become tomorrow. Or I've only got a couple of FX relationships. What happens when I have 50? What then? So the power of a diverse community is you get to understand through pattern recognition what could happen over time. Or I'm divesting a bunch of assets. So who's done that? And they might not be my size, and they might not be in my industry, but they've gone through a period of divestitures. So I need to look into that section of the community. So I think having a diverse community, while not every company is going to be the same, and there's obviously going to be pretty stark differences in what the businesses do, there's a way to learn through A, testing some assumptions through completely different experiences, or B, the diversity of, I need to look forward 10 or 15 years to who I want to be, or 5 years, or I need to look sideways to who I'm becoming. And I think that's the power of a diverse community.
Yeah, that calibration of comparing one to another. Yeah, whether you're looking at benchmarking data, what are the different levels of complexity? But you brought up a good point. As companies grow, they change in complexity, number of payments, type of FX exposure they have, size of the organization. geographic location, there's a difference. Someone with, usually people are, by the time they hit 700 million in sales, they have a dedicated treasury manager because there's massive value in that. Sometimes it's lower, sometimes it's higher. And so it's a different scale. So a $200 million organization acts differently from a $2 billion, quite a bit differently from even a $5 billion. And then when you get to 10, 50, they're different. And so this area of similarities, the overlapping circles and how close they are, gives you some of that learning insight. It may be very different if you're talking to a botanist and someone else. Maybe there's something we can learn from other areas. But I like that idea of there's overlap, depth perception, insight that's achieved there. If this is the case, if there's communities that help us learn, do they help Treasury professionals learn more quickly? And I want to see if there's any more comments you have about that, especially as you look forward, right? It's one thing to say, here's where we are, here's how we need to be structured, here's what we need to do with technology, people, relationships, bank relationships. But as you look forward, where do you see some of the biggest insights or value coming out from this interaction in a community in different means or methods?
So one of the key insights that we see, and I'll go into two of the topics that we brought up earlier, which would be kind of process improvements, so operational efficiency, and then data insights. On the operational efficiency, we work with customers in a pretty detailed way to come on site and really just do a diagnosis of how they're using the system. So it's just a matter of course as part of our service. It's not a paid engagement. We just come on site, spend a day, and really sit next to users of all manner and just see what's happening. And then we go back and we go through all those process flows. So where do you take data from? What do you do with the system? Where do you put data to? How much are you using a spreadsheet? How many people are interacting with this area? How long does it take you to do X? And we compile all that up. And we then replay that back to customers, and we show them where the pain points might be. And they really get excited, and we've had great feedback so far, and we're doing this across the products. And lo and behold, even though the products are fairly different in our portfolio and the customers could be larger or smaller, most people have issues around basic cash management and real-time cash reporting, right? No surprise. And so you see this, and so how can you then leverage is you find within that section of the pain point who's the most efficient. And it may be a corporation that's way bigger or way smaller or way different, and you say, well, what are they actually doing? So let's even ignore what system they're using. What are they actually doing? Are they doing something? Do they have different banks? Are they uploading files in a different way? Do they have just a different process? What are they actually doing to make themselves more efficient? And then I take that as my high water mark of process automation, and then all the other customers would like to understand. I want to find out what that process is, and I want to make that work for my organization, irrespective of the product I'm using. So that would be one way. The second way is the data insights. The nice thing is, again, you learn by looking at information. And so we've seen, revolution in sports analytics. All of the teams, particularly in American sports, have changed dramatically the way that they source talent, the way that they put people on the field or the basketball court or the baseball field, because they understand that through data, we can have an unbiased view of what's actually going on with the athlete themselves. And so we're starting to play some of that back to the corporation as well. So what's the average number of X that you should really have? What's the total spread that you should be spending on Y or earning on Y? Those types of things people are really excited to see as well. So it's really those two areas that we've been trying to replay back to the customer base to provide the community insight so they can leverage.
Interesting. It's almost like Treasury is catching up to baseball, for example. It's like they never had people crunching numbers. Now they have 4 or 5 or 6 people on the team that do nothing but crunch numbers to figure out how they're pitching, what they're doing. Very, very interesting. But let's move on to the concept of, or expand the concept of communities to, there's Treasury, there's areas that focus on the capital markets. What's the structure of the firm's balance sheet? Is there convergence there, or are there still going to be solid lines? What's pushing them together from a practice standpoint, or pulling them apart from a focus standpoint?
Yeah, that's a great question. And when I think about convergence, I think about two distinct universes, right? I think about capital markets and let's say banking and all the banking services that come with that, and then the corporation, and we definitely see them converging quite rapidly. I was mentioning on the walk over, very impressed with the amount of banks that are here at AFP. No surprise. As a bank, I want to be able to differentiate myself because there is something special and unique about me, whether it's my capabilities, the regions that I focus on, either the depth or the breadth of services I provide. I'm going to be different than another bank. And there's a finite number of banks and there's a much larger number of corporates. So I think that positioning is inevitable as we see banks and capital markets firms get closer to corporates. And so that convergence is something that, speaking with my ION hat on, we are trying to enable, because on the other side of the house in our capital markets division, we provide tools to the banks to make markets in fixed income and FX, and provide execution tools and derivatives, and also provide data and analytics through a subsidiary called Dealogic around really bank fee analysis. So how much you might pay for raising debt, raising equity, being advised on M&A, and then more precisely, who are the best banks at doing that in a particular size range, in a particular geography over the last X period. And so one of the things that we would like to do as these worlds converge is we'd like to enable the corporation through buying services like Dealogic, the transparency, the quote-unquote bank fee analysis, albeit it's not an everyday thing, but they're quite often pretty large expenditures, to have more transparency around the best banks that can service them and how to negotiate those rates. Conversely, from the bank's perspective, this is actually fine because the bank's trying to make sure they can get an entree into the corporation and actually understand for themselves who's their sweet spot from a corporate. And so the more transparency that's between those two communities, the actual better service that either side gets. So a corporate might get specialized service, better fees, and the bank might get more business because they're targeting the people that they're best capable to serve. So it's a very poor analogy, but I would say Amazon was great at putting buyers and sellers together, right? And then they have an understanding of, well, if you're buying this, you're probably going to want X, right? It's a very generic example, but theoretically, if you've got a corporate and they're used to procuring XYZ from a capital markets point of view, one can imagine that there's 2 or 3 banks that really fit them and a bunch that don't, and matching those buyers and sellers, or consumers and sellers of capital markets, we think just provides a level of automation as those communities converge that really is necessary in the next 5 or 10 years as this space evolves.
I thought your example was great. It was very different from what I was expecting, because we were talking on the corporate side and building communities, and then you talked about what the banks are doing, how they look at it. Very interesting. But maybe jumping back onto the corporate side of that, when you see convergence, are you seeing the similar type things that you talked about on the banking side from different disciplines in Treasury, or different types of Treasury, or different industries that Treasuries operate in? They're learning from each other and certain things are converging. Are you seeing or doing anything in that regard?
Yeah. In terms of diversity of corporate Treasury businesses and the convergence of maybe areas in disparate industries, I would go back to probably the cash management example is definitely one where I think no matter what the inputs to your business and how you generate the cash flow and the banks that you manage, you just want to be more efficient and being able to, at the snap of a finger, generate real-time cash position with the effect of my payments and receivables, all my various exposures, in what currency, so on and so forth. Because then you can do fun things like auto sweep into money markets, you can better time your FX trades, you can do all sorts of interesting things that probably yield higher volume capital markets inflows and outflows, more sophisticated cash forecasting, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that is just universal across industry. We're seeing that for sure. I would think the second thing is and it's a little bit further afield from community, but I think the harnessing the power of community will bring us the best practices that lead this to be true, is efficiency around anything that's coming in and anything that's going out. So coming in is bank connectivity, going out could be payment factory, for instance, right? So very simple examples. These are often pain points that we see, across any treasury provider, corporation, et cetera. I don't think it's perfect by any stretch of the imagination in any situation. And so oftentimes it's really not about the industry somebody's in, but look, I need to get inbound inputs from a bank. I need to make payments. I want this to be very seamless. This is a process where it should be automated. And oh, by the way, there's a lot of data to be had, particularly on the payment side, to help me just be better and more informed. So if I can automate this, I can then get the data insights. So in terms of just process areas, big chunky process areas, those are areas that span across industry that we're seeing a lot of interest in, people just harnessing what is the best practice cross industry.
I like that. It started making me think about networks as well, right? There's an aspect of community where a network solves the connectivity issue. A technology community, whether it's Swift or it's an API-driven element or a hub that provides that service, you solve that issue in a group, in a multi-layered way to take that out of the process. Just like there's learning that can be had more cerebrally based to help you understand how we look at things differently, bank relationship structure, counterparty risk, et cetera. Very, very interesting. Now, I did want to ask you just questions about what ION's doing in the Treasury community, because you not only have 7 corporate products that span a range of technology and functionality needs. I know you're doing development, some common development where, keeping track of bank accounts, foreign bank account reporting. You do some common development that all of those systems can leverage. But I wanted to just hear some of the things you're doing to build the ION Treasury community, to bring those different voices together that are still in the Treasury domain, even though they might be at different parts of the playing field there.
Yeah. A couple of key areas of focus for us, in no particular order, but number one is data and insights. And so we're doing it really in I would say 2.5 ways. So way number one is what I talked about, which is the on-site consulting, going through business process analysis and really trying to establish a framework for each customer to compare themselves with really anybody else, frankly, across industry in terms of process. So that would be one. The second is we are working directly with customers and also with external information to use machine learning to start to gain insights on really what are the trends of either people using certain aspects of the system or asking for certain aspects of the system. So if we see lots of people really interested in an area, whether it's prospective customers, whether it's existing customers looking for something to be enhanced across the entire portfolio, irrespective of product, that raises a green flag to us to say this is really important. So the community is speaking to us, and this is a leading indicator that this thing is very important, right?
It's emerging. Something's emerging. I mean, is there an example of that? I mean, I know there's different issues. Might be certain counterparties, like particular European banks, are viewed as being threatened, and therefore all of a sudden people are like, I need to know what my exposure is. I need to calibrate that or measure that in some way. What are some examples you're seeing of like this? The early crowd starting to indicate a need, and because Treasury has to respond quickly, in real time. They can't wait like an accountant may be able to wait 3 years for FASB or to come to play.
Yeah. So some of the things that we're wanting to see. So I mentioned real-time cash position. I'd say real-time and seamless connectivity. That would be another one. And you may say, well, gee, I would think that's already part of anybody's package and that exists. But I don't think that's necessarily true, and we're seeing that in a lot of RFPs. We're seeing that in a lot of inbounds where that's something that people would expect. And I think the older world of file transfer and maybe information not seamlessly arriving into the TMS, therefore people can't seamlessly do real-time reporting, is a big ask and is something that we're seeing as a green flag of importance.
Excellent. So I got you. I sidetracked you on 2. You said 2.5, which I'm going to use that in other questions because someone's like, "What's the half?" Go ahead. What was the third or
Yep.
2.5.
Yep, the second half. So we mentioned the on-site consulting, so the experienced business process. We mentioned the machine learning. The other half is really starting to do what I would say organic surveying. So really trying to have a way for our customers to have a voice to us. And I think there's several flavors, and why I say a half is we haven't fully launched the flavor that we'd like to go with. So there's a couple flavors which are we can go out and prospectively have folks fill some information out. We can call them on the phone and have them fill some information out. But there's another way that we're developing, which is called Client Portal. And so Client Portal is a place for all of our customers to A, get all the news around all of our products and the Ion Treasury community. B, they can proactively provide all sorts of information, things they'd like to see, areas they're seeing strength, areas they're seeing weakness, but also it will play back all of the various benchmarks and best practices and things that we learn. As we learn, they will all learn, and it becomes kind of self-fulfilling. So that's something we're focused on rolling out in full in 2019. We have Customer Portal in our capital markets business. So the fact that our group has that type of scale, we can leverage things that are in production, serving large customers, in this case, banks and capital markets already with Client Portal. And we're going to roll that out to Treasury in 2019. So that's why I say it's a half, because it's not there yet.
Yeah, that's good. I'm going to use that even if it's not halfway developed in the future, just to get people to listen. That's great. So, the other, as you were talking about that too, I thought about community and networks. What are the power of networks? What you can do with it, how big it is, right? And same thing, what's the power of community? What insights can you gain from it? How can you leverage it? So I really like the idea of, you're leveraging 1,200 of your customers who have similar and different views of the same street corner, or maybe several different street corners, and being able to leverage that. That sounds excellent. I hope we can catch up on that in a future podcast. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, appreciate the time today for sure. And we're really, I would say, excited about what the future holds with community. We see this as an area of continued strength for customers that get to dive back in, learn from each other, really accelerate the way that they operate their treasuries. And we, again, fervently believe the treasurer has been and will be increasingly of importance in becoming more and more proactive. And so to the extent that they can learn some of these techniques from peers, take that back, make dramatic improvements to their own treasury, it's really interesting work, great for their career, great for their company. And if we can enable that to happen through the power of community, that's what we're here for. That's our job.
Excellent. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it, Alex.
Great. Thanks, Craig.
You've reached the end of another episode of the Treasury Update podcast. Be sure to follow Strategic Treasurer on LinkedIn. Just search for Strategic Treasurer. This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.